to Accelerate Your Wealth, a podcast by Rebecca Robertson, founder and director of Evolution Financial Planning. We hope you enjoy the show, and please feel free to leave us a review. It really does help. Feel free to connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram, or head over to www.rebeccarobertson.co.uk or our sponsor, Evolution Financial Planning, for regulated advice on www.evolutionfinancialplanning.co.uk/podcast.
So today we were going to be talking to Tom, or Thomas Mather. He works at Aegon, who are a life and pension provider. Tom is an international experienced researcher who's currently leading initiatives at Aegon Centre of Behavioural Research. Here, his team delve into identifying tools, techniques, rules of thumb, and other interventions to facilitate long-term decisions with a focus on money and mindset. He's also the author of a financial wellbeing published book in Germany. So if you are German speaking or can read German, then do go and check out his book, serving as a resource for German speaking community. And I will share the link for that in the show notes. I'd love to hear that book in English if I can convince him to do so. So in today's show, we're going to be talking about financial well-being, how that fits in with women thinking about their future and why they're not thinking about their future. And we're also going to be talking about human-centric financial advice. Super interesting conversation, which someone like me, I completely geek out at. So I hope you enjoy it. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's show, please do leave a review on whichever platform you're on, or go onto my socials and share it. I'd love for you to share the show with more people. We're just over 30,000 downloads, and I'd love to get to 35 by the end of this year, which is slightly ambitious, but I'd love your support if you can help me do that. Enjoy today's show and sending you lots of love. So I'm so happy to have you here today, Tom. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's great to be here.
No, I think I'm over nearly 31,000 downloads, which for a little podcast, I think is pretty good going.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I can share some, knowledge of what you do with people, I think that's amazing. First of all, can I call you Tom? Because obviously you're on your email, you are Thomas.
Yeah, everyone calls me Tom. That's fine.
Right. And I've just got to ask, you're obviously in Edinburgh. Looks like you're at home, not in an office. What's the picture behind you? Those on the podcast, I'm sorry, you'd have to go and check it out on my YouTube account. What's that picture?
That picture has been drawn by a friend of mine. He is a waiter in an Iranian restaurant around the corner where I often go to, and he painted that for me. It was a present. I really liked it, and I thought I sort of honor the gift by sort of popularly placing it in my background.
Iranian,
Iranian, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's from Tehran. He's a waiter in that restaurant, and during COVID, he picked up painting as a hobby. And that's what he did.
And he particularly likes, is it Japanese?
They look Japanese, yeah, exactly. I think there was some inspiration. To be honest, I've forgotten what the inspiration was, but there was a big artist, a big name artist, who inspired him to do that particular work. And he.
Very different, really unusual.
Yeah, thank you. And it adds a bit of colour to the grey wall.
Yeah, exactly that. I'm sure, you've got a lovely home, so not expecting you to show me around. I just thought I would
yeah, thank
you. What have you got in your drawers? That'd be a new thing for the podcast.
I pass that on, thank you.
So you're from Germany, Berlin, is that right?
I lived in Berlin. Yeah, that's right. I'm German. I lived in Berlin for a long time before I moved to Edinburgh. I studied in Berlin, but I'm actually from Hamburg, which is Germany's second city in the north, the big port city. Exactly. But 13 years ago, I moved. My wife and I, we moved both from Berlin at the time to Edinburgh. That's right.
Why Edinburgh? It's colder. It's windier. I mean, not my family are from Scotland, so much respect to people. So not just in the Scottish. I know how cold it is. Was it work-orientated change?
I mean, I think Edinburgh is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, really. It's the right size. Fair enough, it is cold, or colder, It's not that rainy, actually. It's more the North Sea wind that sort of gets you down sometimes. But I mean, it's got such a beautiful city center, the old town, the new town. We live close to the heart of the new town and what's called the third new town. And yeah, it's got a very own character. I love the Edinburgh mindset, which is a very sort of liberal, it doesn't matter where you're from, as long as you contribute, you are one of ours, and that type of mindset. So yeah, we felt when we moved here 13 years ago, we felt very welcomed and at home.
I love that.
Yeah, no, it's great.
My family are all from Glasgow, not particularly Edinburgh, so it's slightly different. And the rougher side of Glasgow, shall we say?
Right. Yeah.
And that's where originally. But my granddad's from Ayrshire.
Right. Okay. Ayrshire. Yeah.
Sort of slightly further south of Glasgow.
Yeah.
And my dad was born in Scotland, so I have much love to my ancestry. I was brought up by my dad and my granddad, so if you started speaking sort of pure Glasgow Scottish, I'd understand what you're saying.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if do you know Rob? Is it Nesbitt? Was it Nesbitt? Well, there was a character, a Glasgow Scottish comedian, and I'm sure his name was Nesbitt.
All right.
My husband listens to, like, years ago, he was listening to these sketches, and he couldn't understand a word he was saying. I was like, I knew exactly what he was saying. Strong accent. But you've been in researching a long time, right? You've always had a fascination with research.
Yeah, that's right. So I studied social anthropology in first in Hamburg, and then moved to Berlin for that. First more in the health realm.
Yeah, and you did some research for the NHS, right?
That's right. The Scottish government is where I started here, because that was connecting quite nicely with what I did my PhD on, which was to do
health of the heart, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it was to do with.
I've been LinkedIn stalking you.
Well, you've done your research. Very good. So exactly, it was all about how we can help people who have chronic heart failure with modern telecommunications, telemedical solutions. I guess, this is something that only occurred to me a little later. The question that really interested me, I think, from pretty early on is why we find it so hard to make good long-term decisions for ourselves. When, the same problem applies in health pretty often, that the doctors tell us what we've got to do so as to live with a chronic illness, but we find it really hard. I mean, those with chronic heart failure, just to pick up that example, they know they should avoid too much coffee and cake and all those things, but then you are at a
life's too short, right?
Exactly, yeah, of course you do it, right? And those telemedical solutions at the time, they were there to sort of tell them, remind them this is not what you ought to be doing, and of course,
like that a little nag.
Exactly, it had a bit of success, and now, of course, in the wealth sector, or now in pensions, and as we think about the right financial conduct, it's a similar thing, right? We find it intrinsically quite hard to make good long-term decisions, just because having that mindset is really difficult. We're not necessarily equipped to making good long-term decisions. So it's
that immediate need that we sort of go, but I really fancy it, or I really want to do this thing, not the long-term benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course that comes from, anthropologically speaking, right? I mean, we were as a species, we are like 200,000 years old, and of course, back then when we were living in small bands and wandering the countryside, then this instant gratification was a good thing to be dealing with problems that we were faced with, and that's why we are equipped that way. But of course, the problem is that we are living in much more complex and diverse contexts nowadays. So these instincts of the past, they're not necessarily serving us well in all situations. They often do serve us well, but in some cases they don't. And how we can, work out how to better address those instincts and emotions and beliefs and habits and context factors, etc. That is something that I'm interested in.
To stop me eating cake is just, that's a tricky one. But I should be putting into a pension because it's part of the industry that I'm part of.
Well,
I was speaking to a yoga instructor yesterday, and she's running a retreat in March. Lovely lady, lovely Linda, if you're listening, Linda. And I'm looking to go on her retreat, and I've been to her house, and she eats so healthily. She's so into it, and she's just like a scientist with food. It fascinates me. And there's me eating a packet of crisps. And it's hard, right, to make that, like, I know that's not, I shouldn't be having those crisps, but it's really hard to make those shifting changes in mind. And I think for women, I was talking at the Financial Times, the name dropping, conference like a week or so ago. And we were talking about women on the state. It was a part of a panel. We were talking about women, and we were talking about how women tend to put off those longer term financial decisions, maybe because it's not immediate gratification necessary for themselves, although it might be for their hair getting done. And I'm not trying to use a patronizing sort of stereotype here, but if you look at the world's wealth and you look at how the power of women and what we have such an immense buying power. It's worth billions of pounds worldwide, but the majority of the money that we spend is not on our health or our wealth. It's on what we look like, and it's on cosmetic products. So I'm saying this statistically, like, you're the statistics and research here. You've probably got more research on this, but we do spend a lot of money on how we look. So you're either prioritizing Botox now, seems to be a bit of a popular trend. I have actually a client who sent me her budget planner, and it says cosmetics, and she has a budget for her cosmetic surgery every year. So we're talking quite serious things, especially women around their 50s who are getting that little bit older, or it's on their kids. So they're prioritizing their kids' football boots, they're prioritizing the kids, might be getting a tutor to get them into grammar school. It might be that, the little Mary likes to do ballet. They're prioritizing those things for their children's future, not their own.
Oh, wow, there's a lot in that. I guess the first thing I would say is that the same expense, the same purchase can be good or bad depending on its context. So I mean, or even, whatever, really, the odd sort of binge on cake or crisps or whatever, I don't think it's like it's always wrong. So sometimes, you need that, and it's all about like balancing the needs of your present self as well as the needs of your future self. That's why we talk about financial well-being, because it's all about those trade-offs that you're needing to do. But you're onto something there, of course, with the gender aspect. And the thing that comes to mind here is a study that we did at our Center for Behavioral Research, where we looked into how households arrange their finances. And what we did was we invited members of a household where there were heterosexual couples in. So obviously, we excluded homosexual couples for obvious reasons in this context. And we asked the men and the women who were in that relationship, we asked them, who in your household is responsible for how much to spend on grocery shopping and how much to spend on Christmas presents and how much
I know the answer to this.
So exactly. I mean, to be fair, the most people said we're both equally responsible, but then the difference between men and women who said I'm responsible or my partner is responsible was, of course, quite stereotypical, with women saying I'm in charge of how much to spend on grocery shopping and I'm in charge on how much to spend for Christmas present and childcare, etc., all those things, and women saying it's my partner who's in charge of how much to spend on the future or how much to save for the future. Or the opposite, men saying I'm in charge for how much to save for the future and my partner is in charge of how much to spend on grocery shopping.
Like the day-to-day sort of running households is the female, which is why when they go and get a part-time job or they go back to work, it's to fulfill that day-to-day lifestyle rather than paying into their pension.
Exactly. So I think the bottom line here is that the way, and this is a sort of behavioral economic explanation, perhaps, that the way households arrange their finances nudges women to think short term and nudges men to think long term. Okay, so that's as I say, that's a behavioral economic argument, because it looks at this, nudging and how context factors sort of enable or impede you, etc. I guess, though, and you were hinting at that as well, there is perhaps something deeper happening as well, and that is, emotional drivers or some sort of deeper instincts that, to be honest, I'm not necessarily, neither by nature, if you will, nor from the data that I have, well equipped to talk about. But I guess the thing that I really find interesting is that women seem to be finding it harder, perhaps on an emotional level, to be thinking long term and to be thinking about their future, or let me put it that way, to be positively and intuitively and concretely connected to the needs and wishes and requirements of their future selves. Yeah. Okay, and that is something that, from the research that we've done, is so important to achieve long-term financial outcomes, good long-term financial outcomes, but even present-day financial outcomes. Yeah, so we know that people who have that long-term mental time horizon, they, of course, they would save more in a retirement plan, but they are also less likely to have debt. They're more likely to have emergency savings. They're more likely to have the insurance products that we consider advisable, etc. So to have that future-oriented mindset is really important, to have that concrete and meaningful connection to the needs of your future self. But what you were hinting at here, the likelihood to spend a lot of money on products that get rid of wrinkles or that remove gray hair, or that, although they are, of course, I mean, the fact that, it's an anti-aging product. So there you have it, the very fact that we have an anti-aging market, which really suppresses the signs of aging
as a society. Just to mention, we're encouraged to not age. Women are not celebrated to age. You look at Tom Cruise, you look at any of the top, 80s and 90s sort of big, like those sort of big actors.
Yes.
They're aging, and those men are celebrated, whereas women aren't. And what I loved recently, just because I've shared it on Facebook this morning, was Pamela Anderson went to, I think it was Paris Fashion Week, and she turned up with no makeup, absolutely no makeup on. Talking Pamela Anderson here, like we're talking, the massive pop art, like idol of the 70s, the 80s and 90s. And I think it was Jamie Lee Curtis tweeted her or did something on social media celebrating, and Jamie Lee Curtis is the kind of woman to sort of be banging that drum, and we don't have enough role models doing that. So I'm not I think it's I'm not blaming women. I mean, I'm not, I dye my hair. I had really orangey and grey roots, so I do dye my hair, and I'm not dissing anyone who has cosmetic surgery, and there's a lot of internal trauma and identity issues, and there's a whole bag of other stuff going on, but we're not encouraged, we're not empowered to think of ourselves that way.
Yeah, exactly. So absolutely, this is, again, to my point earlier, this is not to say that only because you dye your hair, you have the wrong attitude to aging, or so, that's what I'm saying. But it is important to understand deeper drivers and emotions and instincts, etc., that drive that behavior. I think that is that type of self-knowledge is a really important asset for long-term financial well-being.
But why do women recognize that they're starting to see their aging, therefore they can see their future, and then go, I want to slow this down? I've got some eye cream because I get puffy eyes, and I know you're obviously a gentleman, so but this is a female-led podcast. I've been talking quite a lot recently. I'm premenopausal or perimenopausal. Your skin starts to thin, your hair starts to fall out, you start getting hair in places you don't want hair, you start to change, right? So then you're trying to, just naturally as I can, slow that process down, kind of thing. And I can recognize that, but so why can't we can, I guess it's because it's visual. But why can't we see our future, our financial future? Why can't we link that? And I remember when I heard you talk in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago, you talked about the Merrill Edge, is it Merrill Edge tool, which is what came from America. I don't know if everyone remembers it on Facebook, where you would do a scan of your face and it would age you. And you were saying that you didn't think it worked for women, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I will say that first of all, so this is going back to really robust and path-breaking research that has been done 10, 12 years ago out of Hal Hershfield's team. And Hal Hershfield is really doing great work in that space. And he has published a book on that particular subject, Visualize Your Future Self, Meet Your Future Self. So it's great. It's been translated into practice, into propositions or tools that people can use so as to picture their future self. And the way it was being done was a quite literal application of this picture your future self, right? And that you upload a picture of yourself, or you take a picture of yourself on your phone, and then using some AI, you're being aged, and you get those wrinkles and you get that gray hair, etc. Again, I will say, in fairness, that a lot of positive feedback has been received on that approach, including by many women and many thought leaders in the States who are working in this area that we are exploring here as well. We had a hunch that potentially it isn't going down that well among women. Just this started off with anecdotal feedback that we were just getting in our circles, but then we did test it a bit more robustly in a study that was conducted here in the UK. And perhaps this is context. Perhaps there's something UK specific versus how the same thing lands in the US. I don't know. That might be interesting. But certainly when we did test that intervention with women, and we subsequently explained, well, this is a tool that is intended to help you picture your retirement and help you save for retirement, etc. There were women who came back to say, well, that just makes me want to take Botox. Yeah.
That goes back to my point that I was making earlier on, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we did see also, I mean, even, you could potentially ask questions, well, perhaps that aging AI that we were using wasn't perhaps as good as what was initially being used in the States or so. But even if you just asked in the general public, like, would you want to see yourself? You wouldn't phrase it that way, but you can see there's a big difference between the propensity of men to be saying, yeah, I'd be up for that, versus the propensity of women to say, yeah, they go for it. It's very unlikely. So it hits a nerve, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why when we started exploring what else might be done, we felt something that doesn't use quite that literal application of picture your future self.
Yeah,
for that reason.
I almost feel like what would be the male equivalent, like in my head, and I don't want to say out loud what I'm thinking because it's very crude, but what would be the male equivalent that would trigger men? Let me show you a picture of a part of your body, of your future self, and what that would look like in 20 years time. All men would go, I don't want to see that. You can guess, fill in the blanks. What I'm thinking. Because anyway, I will just, that's my brain, it just works. I can't help
no, fair enough. You know what I will say though, I think perhaps we're reaching a bit of equity though here, or equality, perhaps in the wrong sense. But what I will say is that I know of men who have the same issues around aging and the signs of aging, especially, and this is just anecdotal, this isn't based on any hard, big, large scale study or so, but especially in my experience when they work for startups. Yeah. So when men work for startups and all of a sudden they see, there's visual impairment or whatever, they need glasses or they get gray hair, etc. They're getting really concerned about this because it's signs of aging. That in a culture, in a startup culture that celebrates, dynamism and flexibility and agility and all those things. Aging doesn't sit well even with men. So I will say that it's not just
definitely. And I would also say that I think there's a generational thing of like my daughter's 15, so but the 20-year-olds and some of the early 30-year-olds are that sort of Instagram generation where the way you look is much more important, and there is a lot more stigma for boys and men now around the way that they look. they've got to have a certain muscles and they're fit, and
Yeah.
I hear my daughter talking like that about, oh no, he's not fit enough, he doesn't play football or rugby, mum, I'm not interested. So there is, I think, a generational change where I think in maybe 10 or 15 years time, more men will have an issue with maybe that app potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, I could. I'm fascinated by this stuff, Tom, and I think I could talk to you all day. And there's so much I want to talk to you about today. I was having a look I was stalking you on your LinkedIn, and I noticed that with Aegon, you've done a 2022, which is good because it's a bit more up to date. It's post COVID, so that's good. Which is a financial wellbeing study.
Yeah.
And I was having a flick through this report, and nothing is sort of overly surprising, but I'd love to hear sort of your insights into it. And some of the key findings from the research were 30% of the population in the UK have experienced some sort of financial trouble in the last 2 years. 30%, that's not that much. I mean, that's a lot. That is a lot of people. But considering we've had COVID, that's actually the proportion. I'm actually would have thought it was more. If you want to jump in and add anything, please.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I would say is this report is about to get updated, and it's actually really very accessible. You just go on to Aegon's website, aegon.co.uk, and you scroll down a little bit on that homepage, and a bit further down there's that link to the flipbook that you have up there.
Okay, great. Thanks for saying that.
It is about to get updated with 2023 data, so we're just coming out of that fieldwork that was conducted in July and August. There isn't actually, and perhaps that is surprising in itself, there isn't a lot of data that needs updated. And that's, of course, I would say that is surprising, because we had, of course, the cost of living crisis and high levels of inflation and energy costs, etc. In the meantime, the share of folk who say that they have too much debt, or that they have only less than £100 left at the end of the month, or that they feel stressed or anxious, and all those things, that hasn't increased a lot. It has increased a little bit, but it hasn't increased perhaps as much as you would expect, and perhaps that's a good thing. Surprising thing, and perhaps not quite what you would pick up when just
my local shopping centre is always so busy, like it's mobbed every weekend. You think people haven't got any money, but they quite obviously have, or they're spending on credit cards.
Potentially. I mean, I think this is perhaps, I guess perhaps worth taking a step back very quick and just to highlight what we were wanting to bring to the fore with this particular notion of financial well-being, because I think it's fair to say that there will never be the one and only objective definition of what financial well-being actually is. I mean, there's tons of definitions out there. It's always a mix of what is objectively happening in your bank account, but also what's happening in the head. What's happening in the bank account, what's happening in the head. And you talked about this in your last episode, money and mindset. That's really important. I think what perhaps is a bit underappreciated on the money side is the long-term perspective. Okay, so we're very good at looking at present day issues. We're looking at the high levels of debt, the lack of emergency savings, the inability of people to make their ends meet, etc. All those things. So that's worthwhile and noble and relevant.
On here, it's like 52% of people couldn't live on their emergency savings for more than 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all those things, and that is important, right? That is really important, and that's we talk about it as a result as well. But I think the thing that was sort of missing in this debate, even in the cost of living debate, was the appreciation that what is happening here and now is happening within a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that we're living longer, healthier lives. As a species, as a group, we're living longer, healthier lives. We're becoming older, and we're living healthy. We live longer, more healthily. Okay. And as a result, that has numerous consequences, but one of the consequences is that perhaps we've got to appreciate that in the longer, healthier lives that we're living, it is inevitable that some sort of crises will happen along the way. Yeah. So it's, I mean, even statistically, we know of all sorts of crises that there were for our parents, for our grandparents, for our grandparents' parents, etc. Why would it be that it was only them who were affected by crisis? Of course, it's inevitable that there will be some cause. And we had, of course, our fair share of crisis. We had a global health crisis, political crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis. Chances are many of your listeners and viewers, they would have had the odd sort of personal crisis, be that divorce or illness, or it's inevitable. But I think the question is a little like, if it is inevitable that crises will happen, the question is more, how are you financially and mentally prepared for it to happen? Yeah, that's a big thing, how you're financially and mentally prepared, and seeing it in that bigger context, the fact that we are living longer, healthier lives, that longevity is a real thing.
Definitely. We sort of have to predict when people are going to die with our job. Either doing projections for long term, as in they're in 30s and 40s now, and we're looking at 20, 30, 40 years time, or they're in their 60s and we're trying to work out should they take an annuity or not, which for those who are listening are like a guaranteed fixed pensionable income. And we're sort of saying, okay, well, is 20 years enough? Is 25 years enough? Are you going to live to 91, 96? We are looking on the far end of 80s and early 90s. Whereas if you think about my grandparents who passed away around like 15, 20 years ago, they were of a generation of a very hard-working Scottish upbringing, and my granddad worked in the mines, and my nan worked in sewing factories. So they didn't have the healthcare that we have now. They wasn't having flexible working. My granddad had many injuries in the mines, which caused him many health concerns and health problems. He had emphysema, and he had that for many, many years. He was very poorly for many, many years. So I totally agree. We don't have the same health issues. We have, although the NHS is struggling massively right now, we still have the medication and the scientific research, and the things have moved on, right? Things have got better in terms of the medical prevention. So yes, we are naturally living longer. But I think people don't like to think about what if the worst was to happen. I've got a client recently who had health cover at work. He had death in service at work, and he was between jobs. He was leaving one job, going to another. He was starting a new job on the Monday, but on the Friday, he had a stroke, and he was 49 when he had the stroke.
Bummer.
Really bad. And the first thing, I've had clients in those situations where fortunately one client had cancer, and it's when you have those phone calls saying, Rebecca, help me, you think quite literally, excuse my language, oh shit, what did we put in place? Did we put any insurances in place? If we didn't, have they got enough money? Can we draw on it? Will they live on it? Could he retire? Could he stop work? But people don't want to think that those things are going to happen to you. You just sort of think, you want to think like hope for the best. As I say, hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Absolutely. I mean, these are exactly the sort of trade-offs that you've got to make in the longer, healthier lives that we're living. And they are in, there's even, if those personal disasters don't hit you, there's numerous complex questions. I mean, young parents, like, do I take this low paid job because it's not worth it perhaps to pay the money just for a childcare provider? Do I save for retirement, or do I save to be able to put down a deposit for home? Exactly, like all those that really, really complex decisions that we are faced with now as a result of longevity, of us living longer, that we've got to make all those trade-offs for happiness now and happiness.
That was my next question. So what financial well-being is surely led by happiness, right?
Yeah.
And you score it in that way. So I was looking at this assessment that you've done, and I was looking at the scoring of your financial well-being, and it looks like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that happiness, future self, written plans, social comparisons, and long-term perspective are all the mindset pieces
That's
around
right.
financial well-being.
Yes.
And how people score them. So how did you find people scored those from your survey?
So what we are doing there is I mentioned it before, we have conducted this big study in the country that's based on 10,000 interviews that we've done in the UK as a whole. That was nationally representative. So we're looking at, genders represented fairly, the age groups, the regions, the socio-demographic makeup, etc. All those things is being fairly represented. And then we ask questions that allow us to quantify how the UK's financial well-being is along the 5 money building blocks that we're talking about in that flip book, as well as the 5 mindset building blocks. And you mentioned them there, about knowledge of what makes you happy. It's about long-term mental time horizons, heavy social comparisons, a long-term plan, and sort of like crisis resilient mindset. And
income, long-term savings, a strong safety net, debt and assets, they were the money building blocks part.
They're the money building blocks. Yeah, exactly. They're perhaps less surprising. I think this is pretty much sort of, accepted standard that these are important types of financial assets that you should have. And of course, there are financial components within financial well-being, but there are, and that's the whole point. It's not just about money, it's also about mindset. But how can we systematically and methodologically think through mindset? And that's where we weave in those 5 building blocks there on the mindset side. And what is happening in that particular survey that you brought up, or that sort of self-assessment, is where your score is being compared to the general public as a whole. And then it sort of shows you like where you under index, where you're performing worse than the general public, versus where you over index or where you're doing better. And as a result, you're played back some improvement opportunities, or suggestions rather. And if it is in relation to that happiness point, I mean, you're right. Happiness is important to financial well-being. And I mean, really, financial well-being is about the ability to spend, earn, and manage money in line with what makes you happy, and in line with what makes you happy today, tomorrow, and beyond. So it's easy to say, right? But of course, the fact is, you won't be able to spend, earn, and manage money in line with what makes you happy if you do not even have an understanding of what makes you happy in the first place.
Exactly.
And when we speak about happiness, we're not speaking, there's like, happiness is a word that is under stress quite a bit, right? And I will say, I mean, no offense to your American viewers and listeners, but I will say that oftentimes my interpretation anyway is that the way happiness is being talked about in the States especially is perhaps not especially helpful, because it's these quite grand terms, and it's like connect to your mission statement, and look into the work that comes out like in context of grit, what's your deeper motives, what's your values. And I find that is really very ambitious. And I mean, perhaps it's helpful, but I think it is perhaps unnecessarily putting people under a lot of stress that, oh my God, I have enough to do. I have enough to think about. I can't now sit down and craft a mission statement, or think about what are the what is it, how I drive happiness in my community or whatever. So when we speak about this happiness, it was actually really inspired by the work that comes out of Paul Dolan at LSE, the behavioral scientist, London School of Economics. When perhaps that's not the way he would summarize it, but I think it is actually a quite mundane understanding of what is happiness. And what he looks into is, what are the, like, every day, what are the things, experiences, activities that give you gratification, that give you joy, that make you feel relaxed. Okay, that could be like really simple things. That could be dropping the kids off at school.
Cool.
Or
I heard this on a reel. I was Facebook flicking on a reels like you do. I was just trying to avoid working, I think, and there was a podcast interview that was recorded a bit like this one, and it was a video, and it was this guy who's I think a psychotherapist of some description, and he was saying, how can you make your everyday Wednesday morning like the happiness that you find like every day? So every day is as great as your most perfect Wednesday mornings. If you think about the way you get up, what you do in the morning, your routine, like how do you make your best life like every day, rather than, you know, your whole life is miserable, but you have your 2-week holiday once a year, and those 2 weeks, you know, we're sort of taught to be a bit like that, aren't we? In terms of, you know, I'm going to put up with my job, I hate my life, but it's okay. I'm going to Magaluf on the, you know, 8 months time.
Exactly.
Tenerife in, you know, 10 months time.
Exactly. And it's really, I mean, the point is, and again, that is Paul Dolan's point, is to think about the experience rather than like what we tell ourselves. I mean, a good example is perhaps a friend of mine here in Edinburgh, actually, who is a scientist, and who describes, like, you know, my identity as a scientist. I love being a scientist. I think it's great to be in charge of a lab at the University of Edinburgh, etc. You know, so she's saying that's evaluation, but the experience is, there's a lot of students that need managed. There are like grant applications she needs to write. There's permanently supplier issues with, like, you know, to do with lab supplies, etc. So what she's describing is happening on an everyday level. Sounds really stressful and sounds like, you know, sounds hard. But then she continued, like, she evaluates in the end, but, you know, I'm a scientist. I love being a scientist. And, well, you know, just listen to how you describe what's happening in your life.
Day to day. Yeah, exactly that. And I think sometimes we have to question whether that's our ego, because we like the status, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that, she spent how many years at university to sort of have this sort of high, and again, that's a bit of a society that we, you know, like my daughter, she may or may not go to university, and it's fine whichever way she goes. And she wants to work with horses, so I'm encouraging her to do business A-level, so she cannot be the one mucking out the stables every day when she's still 40. She could potentially be running a stable. So I think we're sort of, how we encourage people to develop their career is quite a key factor. One point I picked up on the research, and then I've got another question I wanted to ask you after that. I'm sure we could talk. I just find it fascinating. One of the things that found is that our research found that being a higher earner doesn't necessarily equate to being a long-term saver. If a saver has a connection to their future self, understands what gives them joy and purpose, they find long-term perspective. Being one of the highest earners doesn't necessarily mean that you have a long-term perspective. One of the 32% of higher earners who are big long-term savers by the ability to connect with their future self. So compared to
it's 8%, is it?
19% of higher earners who are big long-term savers by the degree of understanding of what gives them joy and purpose.
That way.
I'll show you the little thing that I'm looking at. It looks
exactly. No, exactly. So this is, I think, when we just this chart is quite noisy, but what it is showing, and I'm now perhaps confused because I know the more up-to-date figures, when the same trend that we had published on the back of the 2022 data is being observed in the latest iteration as well. So I think the finding there was that when you are a when you are a high earner, so there's a lot of statistics happening here, so I just like express this in quite banal terms, okay? But if you are a high earner and you have a meaningful and strong connection to your future self, you're 4 times more likely than a high earner with a vague connection to your future self, to be saving significantly in your retirement plan. Okay, so and this is going back to this very basic point that we are seeking to make here, that it's not just to do with money, or it's not just to do with what's happening in your bank account. It's also to do with what's happening in your head, and to do with your mindset. And that, in fact, you know, that to perhaps weave in a gender perspective here again, because when we speak about the gender wealth gap, or the gender pension gap, the way we typically talk about it is that we say, well, because there's a gender pay gap, there is inevitably further down the line a gender wealth gap or gender pension gap.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, this is not to say that this is a flawed argument because money isn't important. Of course, money is important, right? So, and this is what we're saying. You know, money, of course, is important. But it's money and mindset, yeah. And that is why some of those things that we talked about earlier, why having a long-term mental time horizon, and why it really matters that households arrange their finances in a way that nudges women to think short-term and not just men to think long-term. Why that is so important, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was at the Financial Times event, one of the questions from one of the advisors in the forum in the group was what do we do when women say, I don't know, I'm not really bothered about this whole conversation. My husband deals with that.
Yeah.
And I smiled because I don't get those kind of clients. My clients are typically leading it, so they're the female that runs the purse strings and are thinking of the future. Yeah. And sometimes, not always, they're leading it so much that they're actually saying, I'm going to leave my partner behind in this conversation because they're not willing to have it. They're in debt. They've got loads of financial problems. I'm actually doing this on my own. It's not always as a couple. So I don't have my husband's dealing with it. Yeah. I for the I'm leaving my husband behind in this decision making because he can't keep up with me. So yeah. I think sometimes we have to be asking some of the really good questions of advisors because we sort of fall into, depending on our marketing and how we put ourselves out there, what kind of clients that we get. And similar, there's another gentleman, another financial advisor that asked the question, I've got a couple, they both earn really well, both of them are actually doing really well in their careers. Is this not this pension gap? Is this pay gap is becoming, is this going to solve itself? And there was another female financial advisor on the stage with me, and her point was, is in 10 years time, do you think there'll be as much men at home looking after children and caring for children as there is women now? Or it won't change. And my story was that I got made redundant when I was 14 weeks pregnant. I was 28.
Wow.
And I was earning as much, if not more, than my husband with bonuses at that point. And I had to take this was in 2008, so the 2008 recession. My whole career changed, and that was my answer to the gentleman saying, yes, I was a high flying woman, but as soon as you have children, the whole landscape changes. Yeah. So I'm not sure what my point was. I feel like I just went out on a rant there, but I think it was
So no, I get it. I mean, you know what there's a really interesting data point that I came across when I was holidaying in Austria actually this year in the summer. And
is that what you do in your spare time? Additional researching?
No, I was just honestly, I wasn't doing research, but I was sitting in a cafe, I was picking up a local newspaper, and then this article jumped at me. Okay. It was really interesting because it was showing the propensity of women in different parts of Austria to work part-time, and it was correlated with childcare provision.
Right.
Okay. Because the standard argument, of course, goes that women are more likely to be working part-time because childcare provision is so bad, right? Yeah. But what was really interesting about that particular article was that the level of childcare provision in Austria is quite different in different parts of the country. Vienna is liberal and very progressive, and a staggering 95% of children between 0 and 5 are going into full-time childcare.
Wow.
Okay, 95%. That compares to Tyrol, which is much more rural, and the Alps, and where it is less than 50% of the children that go into full-time childcare. However, the share of women working part-time is almost the same in Vienna as well as Tyrol.
So is that down to like the amount of like what do we call it? We call it like the mental strain, because there's still, even with the children in full-time care, like my husband works in London, he sometimes has to go into London, my kids are at school full-time, however I do all the school pickups, all the school drop-offs, all the clubs, I've got horses, but there's a mental strain on women.
Potentially it's to do with bandwidth, exactly, and all sorts of activities that need to happen in the household as well. But my hunch is that when we discuss things like gender pension gap or gender wealth gap or gender pay gap or so, that we're quickly defaulting to rational decisions for why that may be the case and rushing to rational solutions. But actually, potentially, there's something much deeper happening. And, this is going back to what we talked about earlier, perhaps, ability to have a future-oriented mindset, perhaps deeper drivers like shame around aging or avoidance and fatalism,
or only needing to work part-time because the partner's earning enough and they just think, well, actually, I'll just earn enough money to pay for the holidays and I'll just earn enough money to sort of to have a tutor kind of money, lifestyle, rather than bigger impact, more ambition. And I not judging anyone that doesn't have the ambition, because to run a household can be quite enough.
Absolutely.
My whiteboard in my kitchen is covered with notes because otherwise it's swimming around in my head. Super interesting. I've got one more question before I let you go. 6 days ago, so that would have been last week, I think. So we're recording this on Wednesday, so I think this happened on Monday. You did a post on your LinkedIn, looking forward to speaking at the University of Edinburgh Futures Institute about human-centered finance. In essence, we believe it's no longer good enough for financial services firms to be customer-centric. That might mean, especially for fintechs, what is what we are doing, we're going to explore, but here. So first of all, what is a human-centered finance mean?
Yeah, so I guess that contrast that I made in that LinkedIn post is helpful, perhaps, to explain that human centricity point. So when we speak about customer centricity, essentially what we're doing is we're reducing the human to the recipient of a service or product. Yeah, they're a customer. They have received a product. They have received a service. Okay. Yeah. However, when you think about the customer as a human, then you begin to think about that customer, including their emotions, their instincts, their beliefs, their habits, the vulnerabilities, the context factors, all those things as well. Okay. And that results in a different type of financial service or product as a result of that. I was using at that conference, some examples of what it might mean. Also, you can also contrast it with user centricity. Of course, we have usability teams and user researchers who are really putting a lot of work into understanding, how can we make the interface better, and how can we make the activation journey faster, and how, can we make the password reset, blah, 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 all those things. Okay. But if you were human-centric, you would actually seek to understand what are the deeper drivers, what are the deeper emotional drivers for why someone is interacting with a service in the first place. Okay. I would say that, as an example, at Aegon, we have, of course, an Aegon app, and it's a great app. Okay. So it's user friendly. It's a smooth activation journey. You can do lots of things to check pension value and where you invested, etc. All those things, you can do that. What I would say is not being acknowledged in that app is that most people, when they're logging in, their deeper down question is, will I be okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they perhaps have seen there was some volatility in the markets and they're scared. Okay. Yeah. Or they want to see how they've been affected. So there are deeper emotional reasons perhaps for why they are logging in to check their pension value. Okay. So that's not typically what is being considered when you build an app. But of course, it has multiple suggestions for how you improve a product or a service if you consider that.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. And that, so, this was now, I've used ourselves at Aegon as an example here, but, there's this sort of standard budget planners, and there's there's all sorts of innovative projects and products in the fintech market. But typically what I would say is, they almost reduce the human to someone who would act in a rational and functionally and logically right way, if only they're getting the right information. And that's not what I mean with human-centric, right?
Okay. So AI
and
advisors. So my job is all about people. It's about talking to people,
Yeah.
whether it's on Zoom, or some advisors do face-to-face. I don't tend to anymore.
Yeah.
Haven't done for about 6 years before COVID. Where do you see AI and that human-centric piece with advisors and their role in it?
I think AI can actually be really helpful when it comes to, I mean, really in essence, what you need for human-centric finance is more human-centric skills. Okay, so you need all the experience in executing deals and navigating tax regimes and blah blah blah, all those things. That is important, of course. That is important, will always remain important. But more human-centric skills like psychological skills, perhaps something out of neuroscience, perhaps some basic understanding of behavioral finance, etc., that will be really important as well. For that more human-centric type of financial advisor or financial service in general. I think where AI can really help is to provide ideas for how you can build empathy with someone for perhaps who is having a fatalistic view. Yeah, to sort of instill more meaningful discussions. So this is a bereavement case. How can I express this letter, this email? How can I express that in a way that considers the fact that this person is mourning, right? So it's going through tough times. I mean, you need to know what questions to ask. That's why you still need the more sort of human-centric skills as well. But I think AI can perhaps help you to get there faster.
Okay. And so last question. I feel like that I did say it was one more question ages ago, but it was more on like the human-centric.
All right.
Another bit of a can of worms. Excuse me. So Consumer Duty, for those that don't know, Consumer Duty was a regulation that came into place in the summer of this year. We're recording this in 2023. And surprisingly, you'd think this has already been in place, but it's meant to encourage financial advisors to focus on outcomes. So when we first speak to a client, when I first speak to a client, we ask them, okay, what are you trying to achieve? What's your objective? I don't talk about their Aegon pension or their Scottish pension, or I do eventually get to that. It's really about what's your objective? What do you want to achieve? So at the end of this process of me helping you, what would you have got from it? It doesn't have to be a product. It doesn't have to be anything particular. What emotion do you want to feel? What outcome do you want to have? And that is then the premise of the whole conversation. And I've been doing that for years. The FCA are basically saying we have to have that as part of our regulatory process. Which for some people who are very product driven in their advice process, they've not done it before, it might feel a little bit alien to begin with. But I think you become human centric and you start to have more meaningful conversations, it should flow quite easily. So do you think that do you think that sort of human centric, the financial advisors will be shifting naturally more onto a human focused sort of questioning because of Consumer Duty?
I think Consumer Duty is nudging us that way. Yeah, absolutely. I think when you take a step back the last 20 years or so, I think you perhaps would agree that we had two major shifts. That was in the aftermath of 2008. We shifted from product-centric to customer-centric, right? Before 2008, it was all about the features of the product, profitability, the risk structure, all those things. It was about the product. Then in the aftermath of 2008, and of course we all know why, it was about, well, we've got to disclose, the risks to the customer, and we've got to make transparent, what the pros and cons are, etc. And that was also when we had the rise of behavioral science and cleverer communications, and firms like Aegon invested into their customer insight teams, etc. All those things. Now, I think what we're having with Consumer Duty is we're being nudged to that, what I mentioned earlier, from customer-centric to human-centric. So we've got to appreciate that people have emotions, that they have beliefs, that they have biases, that they have, just because you give them a 40-page terms and conditions document that outlines all the risks associated with the product does not mean that people will really read and understand that. Okay, so that is a very practical example of what it means to be human centric. You've got to just convey that in a way that humans' brains work. Yeah.
And it's easy to do as an advisor. Like, it's really easy to say, oh, here it is, read that. And when you've got like 10 different things to deal with, and I always offer a call to say, like, let's go through this together. But it's hard when you're under a lot of pressure as a business owner, as you know, delivering to your clients, to be on the ball with that all the time. Yeah. If people are honest, like 100% of the time, where you're having to stop, it takes a lot of resource. Where I'm actually taking on another administrator to help my client manager so that we can deliver a better service.
Yeah, that's perfectly understandable. I will say, by the way, it's not just consumer duty, I think, that is nudging us that way. I think the future of financial advice will be much less of the sort of investment gurus. It will be much more about like life coaching with a strong financial component in it, because of all those trade-offs that we talked about earlier that make longevity such a hard thing. That make all those balancing acts, like balancing the needs of the present self versus the needs of the future self, both in terms of happiness but also in terms of money, really, really hard. But I think that's where the future of financial advice lies, to sort of, you know, help people navigate that and make the right financial decisions along the way so that they can lead good lives.
Love it. I love it. And I almost feel like that's such a good place to end, but I do want to just check in with you and say, was there anything that we haven't spoken about that you thought that you should mention before you came on the show today?
No, I think it was a great conversation. I think we covered it all. Perhaps the one thing I would mention in passing, if there are any German listeners, is that I have published a book on this particular subject that we talk about at Aegon in the German-speaking world, just the German-speaking world, but it is in essence, in terms of the core concept, it is what we have been talking about, those 10 building blocks, the 5 money building blocks, the 5 mindset building blocks. So if you're German-speaking, you can, and you're interested in the subject, feel free. If you're not German speaker, life's too short to learn German. Don't worry. But
I did German at school, but spreche die Deutsch. That's about all I can do.
It's an awful language, I think, to be honest. But
what do you think? I must say your accent is really interesting, where it's got the German / like sometimes it's almost Irish, but it's not. It's like this twang of like the Scottish twang at the end.
Oh, really?
Interesting. Just listening to you speak. I before you came on the show, I actually recorded your introduction and I did your bio intro. I prefer not doing it with the person listening, so I find it's really embarrassing that I deliver it in a certain tone or a certain way. But I did mention your book, and I mentioned the fact that I'm trying to encourage you to put it into English because I'd love to read it. Is that ever going to happen? Are you going to put it into English?
I think potentially there's going to be an iteration of that book, perhaps at some point later next year, where I perhaps highlight more the trade-offs point, and why we are finding it really hard as humans, considering our genetic and metabolic and psychological and cognitive makeup, why we're finding it really hard to be, you know, to be dealing with money in the way that financial advisors consider the right way.
Yeah, the right way. Yeah, exactly. It's a whole engaging process, isn't it? It's not something you just think, oh, I'm going to go and speak to a financial advisor today. It's over months and months and months and several different conversations with different people that you then get the courage to go, right, okay, I need to do something.
Yeah, exactly. So watch this space.
If that happens next year, I would love to have a copy. So please let me know.
Yes,
and maybe
absolutely.
Come back on the show and come and talk about the book, and we can share the book. But I will be putting the German version in our show notes for those that want to go and buy. They can. It's been a pleasure having you today, Tom.
It's great.
Thank you so much for joining me. What's up for you next? What's Aegon up to next in behavioural science, behavioural and customer insights?
So we do a lot in this space of translating financial well-being and what it means for our customers. What are the most important things that they've got to tackle? I mean, we talk a lot about self-knowledge about what makes you happy, self-knowledge about how instincts and biases, etc., stand in the way, but also self-knowledge about what the future may bring. So we talk a lot about self-knowledge as an asset. We're bringing this essence, I think, to life for both employers, because of course we sell a lot of our products through employers, as well as to advisors, as we help them transition from this, old value proposition of performance maximization to the new value proposition of well-being maximization. So yeah, we do a lot in that space. More is to come, and either through me, perhaps through an account manager at Aegon, or through my LinkedIn or the website or whatever, you will come across it.
I'll just stalk you every now and again on LinkedIn. I think that's my tactic. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It was a joy. Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Accelerate Your Wealth. For further help or to connect with Rebecca directly, please head over to the website www.rebeccarobertson.co.uk, where you can find further information on our planner, book, and how to further maximise your wealth. Our sponsor, Evolution Financial Planning, for regulated advice on pensions, investments, mortgages, insurances on www.evolutionfinancialplanning.co.uk/podcast.